Dividend investing can truly be as easy or as complicated as you want to make it. Now, what I mean by this is that you can, of course, spend days and days researching single name stocks and try to time the perfect entry point to start a brand new position on a stock and lock in a nice starting dividend yield. Or, of course, as an investor, you could take a dumber, more simple approach that, believe it or not, a lot of newer investors seem to miss altogether. Now, in this video, we're going to go over why many times the dumber investors seem to make all the money when it comes to long-term investing, and exactly how they're able to do this step by step. Now, if you happen to be a long-term dividend growth investor, make sure to stick around because I promise you are not going to want to miss out on this information. I just finished my brand new dividend investing ebook where I share exactly how I went from zero to now over 7 figures invested, and also on how I earned more than $6,000 per month in dividends. I also finished my custom dividend tracker that you can use to track your dividend income progress on an ongoing basis. So make sure to grab yourself a copy of my dividend investing ebook and the new dividend tracker today. It's the first link in my description. Now, let's be real, as newer dividend growth investors, you or I remember going through a list of different stocks and basically sorting them from highest yield to lowest yield and picking the few names, the few companies that we thought were going to send our portfolio to the moon. Now, I was definitely guilty of this, and I picked a few different names, AT&T being one of them years ago. And generally speaking, earlier on in my dividend growth investing journey, I was pretty much just buying into single name companies if they offered a nice starting dividend yield. Now, the reason why doing this single stock picking can be, generally speaking, very risky for especially newer investors is because, of course, when you are purchasing a single stock, or let's say even a group of them, your overall portfolio is, of course, not all that diversified. And if 1, 2, or 3 of the names might have a bad quarter or a bad year, newer investors can see their portfolio tank because they just don't have all that much diversification in their portfolio. And unfortunately, a lot of the newer dividend growth investors don't understand in the early days, or maybe just completely ignored altogether like I did back in the early days, that there's a much better approach when it comes to long-term dividend growth investing. And in my opinion, it's definitely investing into a high quality dividend growth ETF. Now, a dividend growth ETF is basically an ETF that has a basket of stocks within it. Some of these ETFs even have hundreds of different stocks in one single name. And with dividend growth ETFs, they all have a few things in common. They all do pay a starting dividend, which is great, especially for the more dividend income focused investors out there, like a lot of you that are probably watching this video right now. But also because they do have the growth aspect. These ETFs also, generally speaking, pay more and more in dividends over time. And although I know in the early days of investing, a lot of these different things that I'm going over in this video might not seem all that important, but I promise you, please take what I'm saying seriously. Because now, around 7 or 8 years since I started dividend growth investing, these are the things I wish I knew right off the bat. Now, one of the metrics that's very important, and of course that has a lot to do with dividend growth ETFs, which is the simpler, dumber way to invest really, is the metric dividend growth rate. Now, dividend growth rate is pretty simple. It's basically how much an ETF or stock pays in dividends annually compared to the previous year. So like a basic example, if a stock or ETF, let's say, paid $1 in dividends in 2023 and then paid $2 in dividends in 2024, the dividend growth rate would be 100%. Now, over time, you're going to realize that a lot of different stocks across the market, as well as ETFs, have a dividend growth rate of somewhere of around maybe 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5%. And I would say personally, a good rule of thumb is anything that has a long-term dividend growth rate north of 5% is definitely something that should get your attention. So the reason on why I think that dividend growth rate, that simple metric, is such a cheat code when it comes to long-term dividend growth investing is simply because of this right here. If you look at this graph right here of every single dividend payment on a quarterly basis that the SCHD ETF, for example, has paid since the inception of the ETF, you can see one thing that's very specific. Over time, the SCHD ETF has paid more and more in dividends on a quarterly basis at a pretty impressive rate. Now, to give you a visual example of an ETF that does not have dividend growth, just to show you how it looks, the QYLD, the Global Nasdaq 100 Covered Call ETF, has been paying dividends on a monthly basis for quite some time. And here's every single monthly dividend that this ETF has paid since the inception of the fund. Now, if you go back in time in 2014, this fund was paying around 19 cents per month per share, 21, 26, and pretty much everything else in between. Now, around 10 or so years later, this ETF is paying around 16 cents per share, 17 cents, 18 cents per share. Now, keep in mind, this ETF has an entirely different strategy, and I'm not saying that this ETF in any way is even comparable to that of something like SCHD. But just to give an example, a visual of what a lack of dividend growth looks like, this is what it looks like right here. Now, this is going to be extremely important, especially for those longer term investors out there that are interested in building a massive portfolio, maybe not within 1 year, 2 years, but maybe 10, 20, or even 30, 40 years. Now, the power of compound interest is going to grow substantially faster if you are investing into an asset that is also paying you more and more in dividends year over year. Now, you might be asking me at this point, well, what's an actual example of an ETF that does offer dividend growth and is also well diversified? And for this example, we'll look at the SCHD ETF or the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF. Now, going back to dividend growth for a second, you can see that over time, every single quarter that SCHD has paid a dividend, at least historically speaking for the most part, has continued to get larger and larger and larger. Take 2014, for example. Back in December, SCHD paid 28 cents on a quarterly basis, where just as of recently in December, now SCHD is paying 74 cents on a quarterly basis. Now, simply put, this means that for every single share that you owned back then, you are basically getting paid more and more and more over time, which is only going to help when it comes down to building a compounding machine of a portfolio. But it's not just SCHD. There's tons of other super simple, easy ways to invest into dividend growth ETFs. Like take VIG, for example, the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation Index, another super high quality ETF that has over 300 different holdings in it. Some of the holdings being things like Microsoft, Apple, United Health Group, tons of super high quality blue chip stocks. But with investing into something like VIG, again, just as another example, you're getting almost a 2% starting dividend yield, but the dividend growth rate, again, how fast the dividend has grown over time, has been substantial. To give another example, VIG back in December was paying around 40 cents in dividends, and now just as of recently, almost 80 cents in dividends. Not to mention ETFs like VIG and SCHD have also grown substantially in ETF price year over year, at least over the long term. Now, lastly, I want to go through a few more of some of my favorite dividend growth ETFs that you guys should definitely look into. And once again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. If you are a relatively newer investor that's building out a long-term dividend growth portfolio, and you're picking single stocks for your portfolio, in my personal humble opinion, I think that could possibly, of course we don't know what's going to happen, but I think possibly that could be a mistake, because investors that are buying into things like DGRO, the iShares Core Dividend Growth ETF, ETFs like VIG that we saw a second ago, and even ETFs like SCHD, investors that are buying into dividend growth ETFs like those are not only getting exposure to some of the biggest, highest quality companies, stocks in the world with just a click of the button, but they're also buying into high quality dividend ETFs that are diversified, offer a nice starting dividend yield, some more than others of course, and also for those longer term investors out there, I promise you, dividend growth rate, or how much year over year in dividends an asset pays, is going to be a very important metric, especially 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So by all means, if you want to be a single stock picker, and keep in mind, I definitely have tons of single pick stocks in my portfolio. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a diversified portfolio with a little bit of everything, but I promise you a portfolio of single pick stocks, especially from a newer investor. And keep in mind, you're most likely going to get better at single stock picking over time as you just become more and more aware of the market and as you learn more. But for newer long-term dividend growth investors that do have a long timeline ahead of them, I think investing into single stocks could be a massive mistake in the context that there's so many high quality dividend growth ETFs out there that would really allow an everyday brand new dividend growth investor to build a super solid foundation for their portfolio long term. But now I want to hear from you guys down below when it comes to building out a long-term dividend growth portfolio. Do you personally prefer single stock picking, or are you someone that buys into dividend growth ETFs like the ones that we showed you in this video? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.